How to avoid manuscript rejection? A research article that has been accepted for publication in a reputable national or international journal is generally considered as the result of a strong research investigation. Each article, after the authors have invested a lot of time and effort into it, is forwarded to a journal for publishing, where it is chosen based on the topic of the paper and the broad scope of the journal. 1. Denial due to out of scope of the journal. Before sending the manuscript, it is the duty of the authors to understand the scope of the journal and make sure the topic of the manuscript fulfills the journal's requirements. This will allow for avoiding unnecessary delays. The editor-in-chief with the editorial staff decide whether the manuscript deserves to be sent for reviewing to the related reviewers. About 25 to 30% of the manuscripts can very quickly be categorized as unsuitable or beyond the scope of the journal. Thus, they reject the manuscript even without sending it to the reviewer. 2. Reasons for denial at editorial level. The most common reasons are lack of novelty, originality, and presentation of obsolete study. The primary qualities that a scientific journal editor emphasizes the most are novelty and non-obviousness. Improper rationale. Making a statement with appropriate evidence and suitable justifications is the aim of research. The article's main argument or justification should be the subject of the whole piece. The goals and objectives should often be stated in the final sentence of the introduction. Lack of concentration and failing to adhere to the manuscript's premise are what lead to rejection. Unimportant and irrelevant subject matter. Peer-reviewed journal articles are the primary means of knowledge dissemination. As a result, a well-known journal only accepts articles that have a significant scientific merit. Flaws in methodology. Some publications demonstrate that the research study's work was conducted wrongly. This is because the researcher does not comprehend the subject, as seen by the poor literature review completed before starting the work. This might or might not be mentioned in the reviewer's comments to the author, but it might be mentioned in the confidential comments to the editor-in-chief. The outcomes of a study will almost certainly be troublesome or questionable if the technique is flawed or questionable, and many reputable peer-reviewed publications will not publish such a study. Lack of interpretations. To interpret the precise causes of the study's findings, the researcher must possess the necessary expertise. Even if the outcomes differ slightly from what the author had anticipated, the author should be able to analyze the cause in the discussion section. It is not necessary to show solely successful outcomes. Manuscripts can support future research if the core cause of the undesirable outcomes is correctly identified. Inappropriate or incomplete statistics. Since statistics are currently in demand, using statistics in a publication's methods and results sections provides it an edge over the competitors. If the data are presented precisely and statistical ideas are used, the chances of the work being approved rise. The manuscript was packaged incorrectly. In some cases, an article that isn't quite on the line can be published if it's properly packed. In some situations, it may be challenging for an assessor to distinguish between an introduction and a discussion. The introduction's purpose is to introduce the subject of the study and to describe the article's objectives or goal. Discussion of the research, establishing comparisons to prior research, and interpretation of the results are all goals of the discussion. Any reader should be able to reproduce the study using the information provided in the section titled Materials and Methods. The discussion ought to be relevant to the study. References to prior studies that support or refute the findings of the current study are required. It's advisable to stay away from making suppositions and educated guesses. Any noteworthy claim that isn't a direct result of the research needs to be supported with citations. The themes that have been researched should be the only ones discussed. Popularity of journals and the editor's priority for the manuscript. Some papers have promise, but because the journal is well-read and receives a ton of hits, prospective manuscripts must be turned down because the editor in higher-graded chief's research manuscripts compete fiercely with them. A work will eventually find a home in another reputable publication if it is rejected for these reasons. Third, reason for rejection after peer review. Major, non-limiting causes for a review article being rejected have been discussed. Incomplete data such as too small a sample size or missing or poor controls. Poor analysis such as using inappropriate statistical tests or a lack of statistics altogether. Inappropriate methodology for answering your hypothesis or using old methodology that has been surpassed by newer, more powerful methods that provide more robust results. Weak research motive where your hypothesis is not clear or scientifically valid, or your data does not answer the question posed. Inaccurate conclusions on assumptions that are not supported by your data. Poor presentation. Poor elaboration of method, poor writing, poor presentation of results. Design flaws like inappropriate study design for the stated objectives, lack of control group, poor control of confounder, weak methodology. Ethical issue. No or improper informed consent, assent, IEC approval, plagiarism, duplicate submission, necessary approval from authorities whenever required. Inadequate compliance to the previous comments. Other additional reason for rejection. The reasons discussed earlier are chiefly the ones due to which the manuscript becomes liable for rejection. Other additional reasons that may play their part adding to the above-mentioned reasons, irrespective of the journal type, may be favoritism or partiality based on the country of origin of the manuscript, less often, but still cannot be completely ruled out. Missing conflict of interest statement. Improper manuscript uploading in the journal's author center. This may add to the frustration of the editor-in-chief. Missing covering letter or with improper author's affiliations. Improper formatting and language, grammatical lapses, and typographic errors. Inadequate corrections of galley proofs. Galley proofs should be corrected boldly, preferably with a red pen so that the printer can easily see it, and not corrected on a separate sheet of paper. In addition, most journals send them along with author queries, AQ, and instructions to be followed for correcting the galley proofs. Inappropriate reference citations ignoring the journal's format. Abstract not given as per journal's requirements. Some journals demand a succinct, 200 words or less, description that concisely and clearly describes the situation and article scope. A clearer and more perceptive abstract will generate greater interest and make the article more appealing, which is the abstract's main goal, to pull in the interested reader. Other factors such as file formatting, spacing, and headings, units and abbreviations, spellings, companies and drug brand names, bibliography, tables, illustrations, chemical structures, submission deadlines, in case of invited reviews, copyright forms submission at appropriate time, grammatical and syntax errors, and so on are all to be taken care of for every specific journal, having distinct requirements for each. Failure to meet the above-mentioned criteria may not necessarily reject the manuscript, but can delay the publication of your manuscript, adding to unnecessary afflictions. Now the question is, after rejection, is it the end for that manuscript? The answer is obviously not. Recognize that there are numerous reasons why someone might be rejected. Publishers frequently look for very specific things, as was previously said. Don't take it personally, don't be disappointed, and don't be upset. An unidentified person reads your writing and decides based on a predetermined set of standards. Respect his thoughts, but be mature enough to recognize whether they are sincere or just written down for the sake of writing. Motivate yourself by reading your article once more and analyzing any improvements that might be possible, as well as any feedback from the reviewers. The best editor, critic, and supporter a writer can have is themselves. With a critical eye, read your essay to see if it veers off topic, poses an unresolved issue, or repeatedly makes the same point. Ask a competitor or a group of peers who are knowledgeable about the topic to read it and offer more insight. The paper should be improved in light of the reviewer's recommendations before being resubmitted to the same journal. If one magazine rejects your manuscript, try another, then another, then another. In conclusion, performing research is challenging, and getting your findings accepted for publication in a renowned journal just makes things more difficult. You will be transported right to the competition site. Although there are many promising studies awaiting publication in reputable journals, the race will ultimately be won by high-quality research and the accompanying well-written pieces.